More dire news reached the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet only weeks after the attempt to bring the Interrex into the Imperium failed. Upon receiving an astropathic message, the Warmaster Horus Lupercal immediately ordered the fleet to make best speed for the world of Davin. There, the 16th Legion, now proudly called the Sons of Horus, rendezvoused with a contingent of word-bearers under the command of First Chaplain Erebus. A war council was convened on the surface, where Erebus revealed to the Warmaster the reason for his urgent communique. Davin's planetary governor, Horus's old friend Eugen Temba, had betrayed the Emperor after taking his garrison forces to put down a rebellion on Davin's moon. The Warmaster was shocked and appalled. He had personally chosen Temba to oversee Davin's transition to imperial rule. That the man would betray his trust was nothing less than a direct insult to Horus himself. It could not be allowed to stand. Filled with rage, the Warmaster ordered the Sons of Horus to launch an immediate attack upon Temba's last known position on Davin's satellite. When the 16th Legion made planetfall on Davin's moon, they found a world radically altered from the one they had encountered 6 decades before. Its extensive forests and moorlands had been transformed into a globe-straddling swamp. Clouds of noxious-smelling gases cloaked the decaying terrain in putrid fog. The Sons of Horus discovered that the swamps concealed mass graves, which contained the rotting corpses of Temba's Imperial Army troops. At the same time, they detected the homing beacon of Temba's flagship, the Glory of Terra. The great vessel represented the only significant landmark in miles of endless swamp, though it too was a decaying ruin. The Legion's initial reconnaissance indicated that Temba and all his troops had perished not long after their arrival on the moon. Horus's own investigation confirmed the downed vessel's beacon had been active for almost 60 years. Yet though Davin's moon was dying, it was far from dead. As Horus's advance party closed on the ruins of the vessel, Temba's former troops came back to horrid life. Their rotting forms clawed up from their watery graves. The undead horde attacked the astonished Imperial force, seeking to drag them down into the mire. Determined to find the source of the unnatural corruption, Horus led an assault by his space marines into the wreckage of the Glory of Terra. But as the Astartes entered the downed vessel, the unstable wreck shifted position in the swamp, scattering the Imperial troops within. In the confusion, Horus was cut off from his sons. He was forced to advance through the decaying warship's haunted corridors alone. Every step was plagued by attacks from another swarm of undead corpses as the vessel's crew reanimated to combat the intruders. They hungered for living flesh, like their counterparts still fighting the Sons of Horus in the swamps. But the Warmaster was a Primarch, and even the living dead could not stand in his way. Swatting the undead aside with Power Maul and Lightning Claw, he journeyed deeper into the vessel until he emerged onto what remained of the Glory of Terra's bridge. And there he beheld the bloated monstrosity that had once been Eugen Temba. Temba and his troops had sought to peacefully meet the tribespeople of Davin's moon during their original mission. But they had been ambushed instead, and during the confrontation had been assaulted by sorcerous powers. Most, including Temba, had given in to the temptations offered by chaos during that attack. While the former Planetary Governor's troops had been reborn as mindless undead, their commander had been greatly favored by the Plague God Nurgle. Though he too was now a walking corpse, his body had become grossly enlarged, a corpulent mass of rotting flesh surrounded by swarms of flies. Still wearing the tattered remains of his uniform, Temba was armed with a sword with a golden hilt and a strangely primitive, napped flint blade. It was the potent artifact of chaos, known as the Anathame, that Erebus had stolen from Zenobia. Temba warmly welcomed Horus to his domain, though the Warmaster was horrified by the transformation of his old friend. Temba's tone soon turned sour. He expressed deep bitterness at being left behind by his commander to rot on such a backwater world. The governor explained how he had found a new patron, and that the Warmaster could find great power if he also chose to serve. When Horus refused Temba's offer, the bloated man attacked with his stone blade. Despite his size and decay, Temba proved immune to pain and injury, his bulky form surprisingly swift. He was also a talented swordsman, capable of keeping even Horus at bay, though the Warmaster knew he had never possessed such skill. Such dexterity was another power granted by the Anathame. At times in the course of the battle, Temba's form would suddenly shimmer. A brief image of the man in his uncorrupted form would appear, screaming in grief and agony. But even with the blessings of the dark gods, Temba was no match for one of the Emperor's sons. Though the rancid creature managed to pierce Horus's shoulder with the Anathame, the Warmaster succeeded in mortally wounding Temba. As he lay dying and Nurgle's power retreated from him, Temba expressed his terrible remorse for giving in to the temptations of chaos. He apologized to the Warmaster for all he had done, and warned Horus to fear the beings who lived within the warp. With his last breath, Temba foretold that only Horus could avert a dark future where the Emperor was a living corpse and the entire galaxy was consumed by war. And then he died, his friend beside him at the end. At the same time, Temba's death severed his link to the army of walking dead. They reverted to inanimate corpses just moments before they overwhelmed the Sons of Horus in the swamps. The Warmasters Astartes eventually found Horus on the ruined bridge, bleeding profusely from the fetid wound in his shoulder. They carried him outside and watched in astonishment when, without warning, he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Terrified that their beloved Primarch might die, the Space Marines rushed Horus back to the fleet. He was handed over to the Legion apothecaries for care. Even their advanced medical technologies proved unable to heal the Warmaster. They could keep him alive, but could do nothing to combat the warp-fueled toxins that prevented his blood from clotting. His death from blood loss was certain, unless another measure could be found. It was the moment that Erebus had been waiting for. The word-bearer convinced the senior officers of the Sons of Horus to entrust their Primarch to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin. He explained that the Lodge's shamans possessed occult knowledge that might succeed where Imperial science had failed. The Sons of Horus knew that such a course was a terrible violation of the Imperial truth, but in their grief and desperation, they handed Horus over to the priests of the Serpent Lodge. Horus was brought into the dark heart of the Lodge. There he was prepared by the Davinite priests for a ritual that would send his consciousness into the warp. Erebus was also there to serve as the Warmaster's spiritual guide. As part of the ritual, the word-bearer's throat was slit so that he could enter the warp alongside the Primarch. Within the Imperium, Erebus took on the appearance of Hastur Sejanus, a member of Horus's Legion who the Warmaster had loved like a son. They had campaigned across 100 worlds together until Sejanus had been killed in an ambush while bringing a new world to Imperial compliance. Horus still deeply mourned this loss. Erebus hoped that by taking the form of someone Horus had great affection for, it would make it easier to convince him to turn to the service of chaos. As the Davinites began their chant, and Erebus's blood began to flow, Horus awoke within the Imperium. He found himself in a verdant meadow, and immediately believed he had met his end. As he began to explore his new surroundings, he was disturbed every so often by sudden glimpses of a hellish wasteland that seemed to exist below the surface of the perfect garden. He discovered Erebus, disguised as Sejanus, floating face down in a stream, and quickly revived him. Horus was overjoyed to be reunited with the friend he believed lost forever. At that moment, the pair were approached by a pack of wolves, bearing the Imperial Eagle icon branded into their fur. The false Sejanus urged Horus to flee before they could attack. When they had escaped the animals, Erebus as Sejanus revealed that he had come as an emissary from the great powers within the warp. He explained that these beings were benevolent and had no real interest in what transpired in the material universe. However, they had come under assault by the Emperor of Mankind, who sought to steal their power for his own. Acting as a conduit for the power of chaos, Sejanus granted Horus a glimpse of the distant future. An entire planet had been transformed into a shrine to worship the Emperor as a god, and 9 of his Primarchs as saints. Standing among the teeming crowds of pilgrims, the Warmaster noticed in growing anger that his likeness was not among them. In Sejanus' voice, Erebus lied to Horus, telling him that the Emperor had abandoned the Great Crusade in order to obtain godhood. Those of his sons who stood against him would be destroyed, but those who aided him would be venerated as demigods by the generations to come. It was then, as jealousy aided Horus, that Erebus made the Dark Gods offer. They asked that Horus ally with them and lead a rebellion in the material realm against the Emperor. The master of mankind's rule would be overthrown, the dark future he plotted forever prevented. The visions provided by chaos had struck an anxious chord in the Warmaster's heart. Ever since his days on Chthoniya, leading the kill gangs, Horus's greatest fear had always been that his rightful place as a leader would be taken from him, that he would be denied his chance at greatness. At the same time, the toxins of the Anathame were surging through his body, weakening the Warmaster's physical and mental resistance to the power of the warp. Long days were passing on Davin as Horus's corrupt wound slowly consumed him. As his strength ebbed, his visions in the Imperium became more feverish and confused. Within the dreamscape, Horus was suddenly attacked by a complement of the Emperor's custodian guards. He brutally slew most of them before allowing himself to be sucked into a raging vortex that represented the power of chaos within the warp. When he emerged from its bewildering grasp, he was hunted once more by the pack of wolves marked by the Imperial Aquila. The largest wolf lunged at Sejanus. The animal's touch psychically disrupted the ritual maintaining Erebus's disguise, revealing his true identity to Horus. Though it was growing difficult to think straight, Horus realized Erebus's deception meant that everything he had seen could be a lie. It was at that moment of maximum doubt that the largest wolf's form shifted to reveal Horus's brother Magnus the Red. The Thousand Sons Primarch had psychically projected himself into the warp. He was desperate to warn Horus that he was being manipulated to betray the Emperor and the Imperium itself. Though Horus understood that the visions were difficult to interpret without understanding their context, he was deeply distrustful of Magnus as well. For his brother to appear before him within the warp meant that Magnus had violated the edicts of Nicaea and was once more wielding the forbidden powers of sorcery. Surrounded by lies and half-truths on every side, Horus could feel his time growing short. He had to make a decision before his life ebbed away. The choice was stark. He could accept the offer made by the powers of the warp and betray everything that once held meaning to him, though he would live to overthrow and perhaps surpass his father. Or he could die a martyr for the Emperor's cause, his lifeblood draining into the sands of Davin's moon, a loyal dog to the last. Yet 3 times he had been warned that the rulers of the Imperium wished him ill. Eugen Temba had foretold that he could save the galaxy from ruin only if he rejected their temptations. Erebus had clearly resorted to deception on their behalf, taking on Sejanus' form to manipulate his emotions. And Magnus had explained outright that everything he was experiencing was meant to push him into serving an agenda not his own. But he was Horus Lupercal, the Imperial Warmaster and the greatest of the Primarchs, the man who had claimed an entire sector with one battle. His anger and wounded pride at the Emperor's abandonment of the Great Crusade, and of him, and willingness to overlook the Primarch's contributions on the new Council of Terror seethed within him. A part of him did believe that the Emperor might want to become a god and betray his sons, and that triggered the old fear, the dark whisper in the back of his mind that he might be replaced, that all he had suffered, all he had accomplished, would amount to nothing, that Horus Lupercal would be denied his place in the sun. And that was intolerable. The future must always be his to shape. Exactly 9 days after he entered the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, Horus emerged from its shadowed interior to the cheers of his waiting Astartes. His wound was completely healed. He grinned at the thunderous reception, though his smile was cold. In the end, the choice had been an easy one. The galaxy would burn.